Hi, welcome back to my channel. Psychic medium Jennifer Hall here. Thanks for joining me. In this video, we are talking about psychic kids. So I'm going to share with you a few key characteristics, some characteristic traits of psychic children. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to share some helpful hints and tricks on how you can support your psychic child and help them to really understand their own abilities and understand who they are, and maybe even help you understand them a little bit better as well. So if that's something that interests you, stick with me. Let's get to it.
Welcome to Spirit Speaks with psychic medium Jennifer Hall.
So as always, I'm going to break this down into kind of a step-by-step sort of process for you. I think that this is just the way that I like to do my videos, especially when they're informative like this one. So I'm going to start with just a couple of key points, some characteristics that maybe indicate that your child or a child that you know is psychic, and really tapping into those psychic abilities. Now, as I've said in many of my videos before, you guys will know this already, I truly firmly believe that we are all psychic. We're all born psychic. So every child technically is psychic and is a medium and has the ability to tap into the non-physical world and the energetic world around them. That being said, there are children that display this a little bit more. I suppose their focus is more focused in an energetic way. There are a lot of kids that just run around like chickens with their heads cut off. So, you know, their focus is kind of here and there and everywhere. And it doesn't mean that they're not necessarily the psychic ones, but their focus is just being a kid. Their focus is truly 100% what they intended to do when they got here, which was just to enjoy life. Where there are some very highly sensitive children out there that you might recognize as more of the psychic kids. So I want to kind of share with you some key traits that maybe signify and kind of define these little guys. So the very first thing that I kind of want to touch on is that obviously this child is going to be super, super sensitive. And I don't mean necessarily sensitive in the way that you know, they're quick to emotions or they cry a lot or anything like that. It's about being sensitive to the world around them, the energy world, but also the physical world around them. So very connected to people, very compassionate, probably a true empath. So really feeling and sensing what other people are feeling and sensing, specifically family members. And they might be kind of protective of their parents as well. Psychic kids are often very nurturing over their mom or their dad or both. And really kind of feeling like almost like they're the parent, very empathetic like that. So first thing, I feel one of the biggest characteristics of a psychic child is that they're super sensitive. This can sometimes manifest also, just so you know, in behavioral issues. Sometimes kids with behavioral issues or have, you know, they have a hard time expressing themselves. It's often because they are so sensitive and they don't really know and understand how to process everything that they feel around them. So if there's an empath as a child, you know, for us, we're kind of like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. I'm just sensitive to other people's energies. But as a child, like, you have no idea what's yours and what's not yet. You're barely even learning that in the first place, not to mention kind of all of the energies and the feelings that you're getting on top of all of that. So it can be a very difficult thing for a child to navigate and to understand, in which case often their reaction is to act out in certain ways. They might be highly volatile in their emotions or in their behaviors. So something to kind of look at as well. So another trait of psychic children is that they tend to just know things. Obviously, being psychic means that you're kind of tapped into that all-knowing place, that all-knowing energy around us. But kids sometimes will come out with things that we're kind of like, how did they know that? They'll say it so matter-of-factly. So if you're having experiences like that with your child, it's very likely that they are very tapped into their psychic abilities, and that they're very tapped into kind of the energy world and sort of the all-knowing around them. Oftentimes kids will say things and just know things, whether they, you know, things that haven't happened yet or things that happened long before they were even born. Maybe sometimes the child is talking about things that happened when you were a child or whatever, but they're going to know things and it's going to freak you out. That's usually a big indicator that your child is tapping into their psychic abilities, and probably on the more sensitive side as well. So another really cool thing about psychic children is that they'll often talk about their past lives. Now, there's a very small window for this for most kids. I believe it's somewhere between, you know, when they're basically able to discuss and talk with you till about 3 or 4 years old. After that, talking about past lives is not super common, but pay attention to this, because if you kind of have a hunch that your child is a psychic child, or that your child is very tapped into the psychic world around them, if they're talking about past lives or their own past life, it's very probable that they're coming here with a super sensitive energy and probably going to remain connected moving forward as well, which is super cool. So that's not super uncommon, to be honest with you. A lot of parents hear their kids talk about things like, well, when I was big before, or when I was a grown-up, this is what I did, or this is how I acted, or this is what happened. One of my children said to me once, just kind of clear as day, we were driving in the car, and she must have been about 3, and she just sort of blurted out, she said, I used to like coconuts when I was big, but I don't like them now that I'm little. And so I kind of just thought, okay, well, maybe that has something to do with it. I mean, not everything has something to do with the past life, but, you know, with other indicators and other very obvious symbols, I just kind of chalk it up to, okay, well, maybe that was a past life, or that was kind of a different experience for her. But if your child is indicating that he or she remembers anything that happened before they got to this physical body, then there's a pretty good indicator that they are a psychic child. So another thing that really kind of indicates a psychic child would be when they're talking about spirit guides or angels, or really knowing things about the spirit world, feeling and sensing, all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of a big lumped in category of connecting to spirit. So your child is probably on the very psychic side if he or she is connecting to the spirit world. So as children get older, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of pinpoint and define what it is that they're feeling. They know that they feel something, they know that they see something, or that they sense someone, but they don't really know how to define that into words, because they realize that the world around them doesn't really work that way. So if your child is, you know, kept up at night because they feel like someone's watching them, or if your child is like blatantly talking about angels all the time, or the angel is here, or the angel is there, that's a very good indicator as well. Or if, you know, sometimes kids will be very frightened at night, and then again, that's not an uncommon thing. It doesn't mean that every child that's scared is tapping into their psychic abilities, but you'll know the difference if your child is talking about someone in the room or someone watching them at night, or, you know, as soon as the lights go out, they feel unsettled. There might be something there. There might be an indicator that they're feeling and sensing the energy world around them, because when our senses kind of close off for the end of the day, you know, we're so much more open, and we're, you know, we're not seeing, we're not hearing, we're not feeling the things around us, so we have the opportunity to tap into our psychic senses instead, in which case with kids, they don't know how to turn that on or off, so it's just sort of automatic. We kind of just flip over to these psychic senses. It's sort of a defense mechanism anyways. So they may be feeling a lot at night specifically. It could be during the day as well. Really little ones, they might be looking off into the corner and smiling and giggling at things that you can't see. But they're probably tapping into their spirit guides, their angels, or watching the loved ones that are in your home watching over you guys. So if your child is having any kind of experiences with guides or angels, also I want to kind of mention too, and again, this doesn't necessarily always indicate a psychic child, but if your child has an imaginary friend, or if you had an imaginary friend when you were a child, you're probably tapping into a spirit guide or an angel. Not so much that they're imaginary, that we're really making them up in our minds. Usually it's just sort of something that you're picking up on in the energy world around us. So something to kind of think about as well. But if your child is picking up on the energy world around them in a very obvious way, talking about spirits or seeing guides or angels or anything like that, then they're probably tapping into their psychic abilities. So another really common trait of psychic children is that they're outdoor kids. They're nature kids through and through. They love to be outside. They love to be on the grass, maybe even barefoot. They love to bring the outdoors indoors. So maybe the kid that's coming home with rocks in his pockets, or, you know, sticks in her backpack. Basically, if your child is wanting to bring the outdoors indoors, maybe they have a very strong connection with animals, or they talk about fairies, or anything really to do with nature, just wanting to be outside in the grandiosity of the world and Mother Nature. They are truly tapping into their psychic abilities and their innate desire to be a part of everything. So to be kind of like the all one. So psychic children often will have a very strong bond with, like I said, could be plants, could be trees, could be just being outside, could be water, could also be animals. So really connected, and really a huge desire to connect and commune with animals, and really understanding them and feeling an emotional attachment with them as well. So then the last thing that I want to kind of talk about, and this could be true for little kids, it could also be true for teenagers or older kids, And I just want to kind of say that it's not exactly the best thing, but it is something that psychic kids often gravitate towards, and it's addictive behaviors. So as little children, addictive behaviors could manifest in the way of patterns in behavior, really, like behavioral addictions essentially, or attention grabbing addictions, that kind of thing. As they get maybe a little bit older, it could be things like video games or kind of activities in that sense. And could even maybe transition into drugs or alcohol, or some kind of gambling or whatever, any kind of addiction. But addictive behaviors don't always have to be necessarily super detrimental, but anything that becomes a pattern is usually a coping mechanism. So for psychic children, they'll often resort to coping mechanisms, again, usually because they are so sensitive in their energies. So obviously having addictive behaviors isn't a key indicator that your child is psychic, but when it's combined with all of these other traits, I think that there's something there to look at. And really all they're doing is they're using that as really a coping mechanism, because the world around them can be so overwhelming. They're turned on at like hyper speed at all times when they're tapping into their psychic self. So it can be a lot. And using things like the TV or video games or, an iPad or whatever, or even drugs or alcohol later on, it can be a numbing factor. It can be something that can kind of steal their focus away from everything around them. So that can be something that, or sort of a reason why maybe some of these psychic children are gravitating towards these more addictive behaviors or sort of behavioral patterns, because they're just feeling so much. Okay, so as promised, I want to share with you guys some things that really help psychic children cope with the world around them, and it can help you to navigate through this as well, but also can encourage them and help them to understand who they are, and that this is a really beautiful thing to tap into, that we don't want to shun it. We don't want to, ignore it completely and create these big, huge boundaries that completely shut it off. We want to nurture it, because truly we want them to follow their instincts and follow their psychic senses and follow their, true navigational system of following the energetic world around them. So we don't want to turn it off. We want to nurture it, but really kind of nurture it in the right way and help them cope throughout as they're growing. So really, I think it's going to come down to just kind of nurturing, understanding them, listening to them if they're wanting to talk, asking them kind of the right questions, especially if they're off at school age and they're off at school and they come home and they're just like, bleh, like they don't know how to deal with themselves after school. Usually it's just because they've picked up so much throughout the day. So nurturing them, giving them some quiet time. It's so, so, so important for psychic children and psychic adults to have time by themselves and to really kind of nurture themselves in quiet ways. So quiet story time, or just even kind of maybe a little bit monitoring the video games, monitoring the TV, but allowing them something to kind of turn off a little bit for a small amount of time. As I mentioned already, outdoors is going to be the best place ever for these psychic kids to hang out. And because their energy, because it's so sensitive, when we're outside, the energy is so much bigger and they can kind of expand a little bit without having to worry about tapping into everybody's stuff while they're expanding and letting go of some pent-up energy. So being outside, going for walks in the woods, going for kind of trips, if you have like a body of water nearby, to a lake or to a beach, that would be a fantastic place to take your psychic children. And if you can't go to water, then fill up the bathtub and maybe encourage them to get into the bath with some Epsom salts or some Himalayan salts, because salts are super grounding. So if you don't live by an ocean, or if you can't just get to a lake, or if it's winter or whatever, kind of moving that over towards the bathtub, or even like a cleansing shower can be helpful after a psychic child has spent a lot of time around a lot of other people. So specifically if we're talking about school, or in kind of public places, it can be very overwhelming for them. So helping them cope through some grounding activities like being outside and being in water is really incredible. Something I think to do as well is to kind of nurture and let them be where they're at. If your child is, like a really little baby and you're just kind of curious, there's a bit of a difference there when they're just kind of coming into it. But if it's starting to bother them, or if they're wondering what's going on or how they can cope, or if there's fear associated with it, specifically at bedtime or throughout the night, I think that there's a fine balance here, because as a parent myself, I totally understand how exhausting it is to be up throughout the night with a scared child, or, kids that just need things. But at the same time, I was also one of those children. And, you know, my parents were always like, okay, like just like throw the covers over, you crawl into bed with them, whatever. They were always so supportive over it. And I think that that was super helpful for me when I was going through these times of fear. So I try to kind of be that for my kids as well when they're needing a little bit extra comfort. But again, it comes with these fine lines of like you needing to get your rest and all that kind of stuff. So I know that it's a bit of a struggle, and each household has very different rules and beliefs around this. So do what feels right to you. But I would say if your psychic child is feeling scared or needing a little bit more comfort, I would say try and do anything that you can to make them feel a bit better, whether that's keeping the light on for them, or maybe playing some soft music or some white noise, or allowing them to come into bed with you or lying down with them for a little bit of time. It's not going to be like this forever. And I think that it's just an important thing to understand that maybe they are really truly picking up on so much and they just don't know, their little brains, their little bodies can't cope with it. So cutting them some slack a little bit, if that feels right to you and your family, obviously. But really just kind of, even if it just comes down to getting a nightlight or having something on that's a little bit more feeling kind of a little bit more safe for them. You could even ask them what would make them feel better. Would it be okay if we left a light on? Would it be okay if we turned on some music so that you're not hearing and your senses are focused on something specific? So I think that that's kind of important as well. So we already talked about kind of alone time, and that's super important to encourage your child to have some nurturing alone time. So this means sometimes too limiting big activities. Sometimes psychic kids have a really hard time with an overwhelming schedule. So setting some sort of maybe limit in the activities, or maybe even having like a really awesome schedule, like a routine, I think would be really powerful, really good for these psychic kids. I think that having something that's predictable for them, like a predictable routine, is going to be really important. And you might notice that your child thrives off of that anyways. So just another characteristic trait of a psychic child is that they thrive off routine, or they like to know what comes next. So even if it's like day by day, always asking what's the next day kind of thing, or just what are we doing after this? It's important to kind of break it down for them so they know what to expect, because the thing about tapping into the spirit world or tapping into kind of the psychic world around us, as we said, it can be very overwhelming, and it can be so much and so disorienting sometimes that having a little bit of structure can be super helpful for the psychic kid. So alone time and quiet time, yes. Limiting activities, yes. And really kind of creating a good routine for your child and for you should be pretty powerful. And I think kind of the last thing that I want to say around this is just kind of go with the flow and nurture. And I think that a lot of us adults, we learn so profoundly from our psychic kids. Listen to them, listen to what they're saying, and try to kind of help them here and there, like I said, if there's fear. But listen to kind of what they have to say and what they want to tap into, and maybe even offering some safe place or some safe activities for them to do that make them feel a little bit better. So something like teaching them meditation or mindful activities for children, or yoga for kids, or really kind of helping them to understand what feels better within themselves as well. So I hope that helps. Maybe you have a pretty good idea going into this if your kid is psychic or not, but I hope that sheds some light on it, and maybe some things that you can do as well to help and support your psychic child. So thanks so much, guys. Look forward to seeing you again. Bye.